Hey everyone, welcome to the Creators Podcast. This is the very first interview that I conducted as a podcast host, and coincidentally, it's about my favorite subject, which is independent musical artists. And my guest is a very bright young man from Glasgow named Chris Blackmore, who at the age of 19 started his own record label representing regional acts, mostly in the genre of contemporary Scottish folk. And this was during a time when MP3 sales had already reached their peak and streaming was just taking off. So Chris and I got into the subject of what value record labels can give independent artists today, when artists already have access to a wealth of online services to help them manage their own careers. So let's meet Chris. And by the way, what's your teenage kid doing? How are you doing, Chris?
I'm very well, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you for being here. So, Chris, I'm going to tell you, this is the first podcast I've ever done. And so I feel it's very auspicious that I'm speaking with you because you are a founder of this record label and I'm also a musician. So I'm very curious to hear about, your impetus for starting a record label in 2013, when everything else in the market at that time would indicate that a record label is a losing proposition, but you did it and you've survived this long. And I checked out your websites and saw your roster of artists. So seems like you got something going on. So let's start with that. Just tell me kind of your background and how you decided this is something you wanted to do.
Yeah, sure. So let me think. I've never been much of a musician myself. However, I've always been a big music fan, always been passionate about live music and great songwriting and whatnot. And so 2013, I was about 19 at this point, and I found myself booking the bands for a pub I was working in and came across this Dundonian blues band called the Boston Tea Party and just loved them. To me, they were the real deal. They had a good bit of hype surrounding them this year. They had some big support slots. They were doing some really cool things, and they really struck with me. So I'd been thinking it would be great if there was a Scottish independent record label catering for my specific music taste while providing a platform for these kind of underground roots artists that may be escaping notoriety. So I made a proposition to put out a single of theirs, and I hastily formed a record label, and then we just went with it, and that was it. I quickly learned that I had a lot to learn, and so I sought advice from various labels and artist managers and promoters and just about anybody around Glasgow that would give me the time of day. And yeah, that was 8 years ago now, and things have just kind of developed and snowballed from there. I think people appreciate the kind of the music we're trying to provide a platform for, the kind of broad range of music from the roots and folk sort of spectrum, of which there's just so much, and it's what I'm passionate about, and I think people can pick that up and really roll with it.
Absolutely. So this is a passion project for you. That's great to hear. So what do you think, what do you think that you're doing for artists that they can't do on their own? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean it in a critical way. I mean that, artists today are actually very lucky because they have access to all the same tools that, the biggest artists in the world have. They can they can self-produce, they can put their own content out, they can, get on streaming channels, and they could do all their own promotions, build their own fan base, and they can kind of have control of the whole operation if they take the time to learn it. So what do you think that you're doing for them that they're not doing for themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good point you make there, man. Artists can be completely self-sufficient. They can do all these things, but they just often don't know how. I didn't know how when I started the label. It just takes the time to learn, the time and the patience. Where artists usually, they thrive off of having their records listened to, and people digging that, and playing their live shows and whatnot. They don't often want to spend the time, doing press releases and getting in touch with radio and submitting for playlists and doing your admin for royalties and whatnot. Like it's just comes well down the priority list for them. So yeah, that's where I came in initially, and just picked up all these bits and kind of tied things together. And as the years went on, my network is growing and my skill set is growing. I know where to push music, and I know what platforms to push the right kind of things to. So, but yeah, really, ultimately, nothing that an artist can't do if they spend the time to do it themselves. It just,
Yeah.
that's really it.
That is it. But I could say this because I have a lot of friends that are kind of in the same boat. They're very talented musicians. They're very good, at what they do. But when it comes to handling all the nitty gritty, all the kind of the skills to be able to do that, your own marketing and manage your own web pages and kind of operate as a business, yeah, it's not high on their list. And I don't blame them. I don't mean it in a critical way at all. Because that's really what an artist's job should be. It should be to create. It should be to spend as much time, all your time, creating and just keep putting stuff out there,
Yeah.
and they do need help. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
100%. Yeah. The creators should create and I help facilitate that creation, and try and provide that platform. But you're absolutely right. If the creators can just focus on creating, then that's great, and yield better results.
Absolutely. So tell me kind of some of the things that you're doing for your artists.
A fair amount. I've recently started managing a few of the acts on the label. But yeah, signing artists for Holy Smokes initially, because I didn't really have the network and didn't know where to push it. It became a kind of all-encompassing deal where I'd do an amount of bookings for them, and I would sort out tours and do all their press and radio and whatnot, and distribute the records. But nowadays it's more a kind of like straightforward sort of record deal I do with them. I don't have the time to do this sort of semi-management with all of them, but there's a few artists on the label that I do fully manage.
Yeah. So what does a record deal mean? What are you giving them?
So that kind of comes in varying capacities with the artists. Some artists will come along with a handful of songs that I've heard, and I'll get them recorded, and we will work out an agreeable deal where we cover manufacturing costs and any promotional costs and put out an artist-friendly deal with them. Some artists come along with a record already made, in which case it's just a kind of licensing deal. I'll pick up the records. Again, we'll work out some agreeable terms and I'll punt it around. But yeah, it's just a case of me taking their music and getting it in front of the right audiences and selling records where we can.
Yeah. So selling records is that your only revenue stream? Like if you help them to sell downloads, sell records, is that primarily your benefit in that? Or are you involved in, like how major artists have like 360 deals now, and like major labels will take a piece of everything they do, their tours, their t-shirts, all that.
Yeah.
So
we don't really touch that, man. Like I don't touch the artists' royalties, don't really deal with publishing or whatnot. We do have a sync deal with an LA-based sync agency, actually, who are pitching for syncs on behalf of the roster. But the only royalties I'll take from artists are manufacturing royalties, or mechanical royalties, rather, just physical sales.
That's a good deal. It's a good deal for them.
Yeah, no complaints.
Sure. Of course, with every new business, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to figure out. What do you think was the most important lesson for you?
The most important lesson? Oh God.
If there's one,
cash flow, I think.
Cash flow, yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be cash flow. At first, I was very, very disorganized. Let's put it that way. And paying for everything out of my own pocket. I mean, it's going to be that way to begin with. But yeah, just the moment where you sit down and sort your spreadsheets out and do your cash flow, so you don't get caught behind when it comes tax return time, then yeah, that was a big step and certain things. And you reap the benefits as well just from being organized and not losing money.
Of course, yeah. How are downloads sales right now? Is it still something that's thriving? Is it growing? What do you see going on?
Yeah, pretty much evaporating, really. We used to get quite a lot of downloads through Bandcamp and the likes, but it's completely drying up these days. We really rely on record sales and, buttons from streaming, but digital downloads are certainly, as far as we're concerned, a goner.
Yeah. So when you say what you rely on record sales, you're talking about physical printed CDs or, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, CDs and vinyl.
I'm sure that there were a lot of sales happened at shows, right?
Yes, aye. Well, not at the moment, but yeah, we tend to rely on live shows. Yeah.
Yeah. So before 2020, you could pretty much count on doing a lot of sales at the shows itself, right? At the events.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So And I think you touched on, sync licensing and some other, options that artists have now for revenue. Are you involved in any of that? Like, are you trying to get sync licensing on YouTube or maybe advertising revenue on YouTube or any other channel?
Yeah, so we use the platform, we use Centric. Unless an artist has a publishing deal in place, we use a platform called Centric, which is a really cracking publishing deal. Industry leading split, I think it's like 80-20. And you can also pitch for syncs from their platform. And as I mentioned, we've got the agency over in LA that's pitching for us for US, and that's already had some pretty decent results. We had recently an Awkward Family Portraits song on the Hulu TV adaptation for High Fidelity. So that's been great for us, and opened up their music to a whole new audience.
Wow, fantastic.
Hi.
Yeah, so let's talk about 2020. What happened to your business? And you don't have to tell me what happened to your artist, because I'm in the same boat. I'm sitting at home, writing new material. Okay, that's probably the most productive thing I've been doing, but yeah, definitely not playing shows. So yeah, tell me what have you been doing? How are you impacted, and how did you keep yourself alive?
Yeah, 2020 flipped the table, by all means, man. So there's a promotions company arm to the label as well. We had a bunch of shows lined up, and I booked for a couple of festivals here in Scotland, and everything was scrapped. And a lot of my time was spent dealing with reschedules and penciling things in for this year. Now we're rescheduling them further. In terms of releases through the label, everything got shelved pretty much. There were plans for a couple of albums and some singles, but it just didn't make sense without the live support. So everything's just been rescheduled for this coming year. So come hell or high water, we're going to release music this year.
Yeah. So what is the sort of projection or the edict from the government as to when venues will be able to open again and have audiences, in the same room as their artists?
Yeah, we really don't know. The kind of general conversation seems to be September is a realistic estimation.
Yeah.
But we don't know. There seems to be some kind of possibility for small socially distanced shows in the next few months, but I'm not really sure how you see that happen.
Sure.
I've got a couple of dates penciled in for the first half of this year, but yeah, we need to see what happens with the vaccinations.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're doing this same thing in the UK, but in the US, some venues have been experimenting with doing outdoor shows. Like they'll do it, if they have the space in their location, they'll do it in the parking lot. They'll set up a stage and do it that way. Some venues do a hybrid. It's kind of weird because in the US, some restaurants are permitted to have dining and serve drinks and stuff. Again, if it's outdoors, all the tables are distanced. But the weird part is that some of these venues still have live acts, but what they do is they keep the band on the stage inside playing, and then they blast the music outside onto the patio where the guests are, which is okay.
Interesting.
It's still a live show. It's still, you get to hear a live band. You're not, I don't know, you're not really experiencing it. And then there's also a thing called drive-in. So you're way too young to remember drive-in movies. I know that for a fact. But it used to be a thing where you could take your car and all your friends and go into a huge parking lot, and there would be a giant movie screen, and over a local AM channel, radio channel, you'd get the audio for the movie. So now they're doing kind of the same thing with concerts. But obviously it's not streamed over a AM channel. You can hear it live, but it's kind of like what we call a tailgate party, where you just get all your friends together and you sit on the hood of your car and have some beers and watch a live band. So that's going on, and that seems to be working. I mean, it seems like audiences are open to it. They're willing to do it, spend the money, and it's still a live experience of some kind. So any of that going on in the UK?
They trialed the drive-in gigs. I think there was a couple down in England, and there was supposed to be one not far from me, but it got scrapped at the last minute. There was over mountain health and safety concerns. But yeah, there's very little going on. We're currently in stage level 4 of 4, which means that everywhere is shut. You can't even go. Can't get a pint. All you can do is meet one person outside. I can go to the supermarket, go to the shops. but that's it. You can't even go in. There's like click and collect for restaurants. You can't sit in a restaurant. So we appear to be some way away from holding events again. But yeah, there was a few attempts at kind of more social distance shows over summer, but yeah, there's been very little since, unfortunately. So fingers crossed.
So how are the venues surviving?
With great difficulty, the few that are, there's a lot of fundraisers going on to support small independent venues, but a lot of them are struggling, and there have unfortunately been a great many that have closed. So sure. Yeah, they really need the support from the government.
So what are your plans for this year? What do you think that you can do? Where do you think there are opportunities where you can keep yourself alive and you can keep your artists productive?
Yeah, well, like I said, we did have a number of releases lined up for last year, which all got scrapped. So we have them rescheduled for this year, and whether we have the live shows or not, we're going to put them out. We're going to lean into the digital side of things. We've been spending a lot of time growing the audiences online and leaning into digital marketing. So yeah, we've got albums lined up with the Strange Blue Dreams and Awkward Family Portraits, and a few new additions to the roster. We're putting out this first release of the year in March, which is an album called Storm with a woman called Mary Campbell. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, I did check out some of your artists, and it seems like you have a certain niche, and you gave it a term, kind of a, maybe you'll have to, correct me on the right term that you use, but something about, it's sort of folk and it's sort of regional. Maybe you can tell me about that. What are the artists that you look for, and kind of what are the trends for that style of music in Scotland right now?
Yeah, well, it's kind of difficult initially to sort of pinpoint what kind of music the label put out, but yeah, I kind of broadly define it as music from the folk and roots spectrum, of which there's a lot, so that can be anything from traditional Scottish and Irish folk tunes to country music, Americana, blues, bluegrass. We've even done a bunch of Eastern European klezmer. So yeah, I'm really into traditions and reinventions of music, and kind of getting right into music of the folk, and yeah, luckily enough, we're blessed with it over here. There's all kinds of cracking folk music and country, and we've also got Celtic Connections, which is just wrapped up there. So yeah, there's definitely a demand for it, which is great.
Yeah. So do you feel that there is a resurgence of interest for this type of music, or has it always been there?
I think it's always been there, certainly. There's just something kind of ingrained, certainly with the Scottish folk music. It's ingrained in us. And there's always been a kind of transatlantic link, folk in the west of Scotland and the UK as well. I've always loved like country music and Americana and bluegrass and everything. So yeah, I don't know so much about a resurgence. I suppose there are resurgences in various genres continuously, but I think it's something that it's something that's always appealed to us.
Yeah, I've always felt that too. I mean, what little I know about Scottish music, Scottish artists, it seems like they're very connected to their culture in that way through music, and they also, and correct me if I'm wrong, they also seem very patriotic. I'm talking about Scottish person in the U.S. Someone that I would meet in the U.S. Very rarely, I can't think of a time where I've heard someone say, "Oh God, I'm so glad I got out of that place." No, they always say how much they missed it. Despite the weather and despite every other thing. But so yeah, do you think that plays into it? That's sort of pride for your nation and pride for your culture. Do you think that has contributed to keeping that style of music alive?
Yeah, I think so. I think you could definitely say that. Aye, people hold it very dear to them. Certainly, there's quite a big kind of trad community here, and it's something. I remember when I first kind of was introduced to it, we have a lot of these kind of folk pub sessions, where it's just like all these old men and women sitting around a table with all their fiddles, mandolins, banjos, guitars, whatever, just taking a turn, sharing a song or sharing a story or a wee poem or whatever, and just kind of going around the circle. And that's what kind of hooked me initially. But I mean, it's a tradition that's been ingrained in the culture, and yeah, it lives on still.
Yeah. So is there any kind of new breed or new genre of of music that you think, oh, this is going to last a long time? That's sort of connected to the folk music and sort of the genres that you're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. There's something that really excites me recently. There's this kind of how to describe it? I suppose you kind of call it like Celtic fusion sort of music. It's sort of music that's rooted in some kind of Scottish folk discipline, but it can go in all sorts of different directions. This album we're putting out with Mary Campbell certainly falls under that category, and it's she's an amazing viola and fiddle player, but she works with this producer who has all these kind of industrial and experimental electronic influences. So just the combination of that is cracking. It's brilliant. And there's so many other artists kind of along those lines. There was a guy called Martin Bennett who passed away a few years ago. He was a real pioneer of that kind of sound. And you get all sorts of really, really cracking live bands. You get Sugar Nifty and Peatbog Fairies, all these big Celtic like electronic sounding bands. It's really cool.
So you're saying it's a fusion of electronic music and folk music?
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. Yeah, and it can go in all sorts of different directions. You can do whatever you like with it, which is the exciting thing. It's breathing life into this genre.
Wow. Okay, that is exciting. I'm going to check into that. So, have any of your artists taken to doing live stream shows?
Yeah. So very early on in lockdown, we actually ran a small series of live sessions or live shows. To varying degrees of success. It's something we're kind of staying away from now because I think it's become oversaturated somewhat. Anyone, the accessibility of it just makes it so that anyone can pick up a guitar and have some really bad quality stream and bash out some songs that nobody's really interested in. However, saying that, there have been some really good examples of really cracking and interesting like immersive live stream sessions. I don't know if you know a band called Lankum. They're an Irish folk band who had this fantastic performance where they played in, I think it was the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, but it starts off with the camera and a sort of a point of view inside a taxi, and you get welcomed inside this like empty theatre, and you've got all these cameos from different Irish bands, and there's a comedian doing a sketch there, and it's like this whole kind of show, but it's more like some kind of weird art exhibition than just like a gig, Because the thing about live streams is like, I know they're live, but it doesn't feel like it's live. You're still missing out on that sort of live essence. So you really need to make it interesting, like super interesting somehow, if there's going to be any appeal, I think.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I mean, in the beginning of lockdowns, I started tuning into some of my favorite bands and their live streams, and so like, okay, it's cool, But yeah, then there was a period, early part of fall, where they lifted restrictions here in the US and people could gather in small numbers, and some of the smaller music venues are open. So I was able to go out and see one of my friends' bands play. And this was like after 8 months of, lockdown. And just from the moment that I heard that first, guitar chord, I was just like, oh God, there's nothing like this in the world, just the volume, and you could feel the drums, the pressure from the air hitting you. And after half an hour, your ears are ringing. I'm like, this is great. This is what it's about. Yeah, absolutely. You'll never be able to recreate that in any kind of VR situation. So it seems like you have a good idea of what a good live stream or virtual production could look like. So have you thought about putting your own together?
We did consider it. We had a few ideas for things. And like I said, we've done a few small ones to begin with. But it's not really something we've thought too much about recently. More just kind of like getting things lined up for these releases and whatnot. But we might look into it later on. I mean, it certainly seems like it's something that's here to stay. There have been great successes, and like I said, really interesting stuff going on. But it's not something we're exploring at the minute.
Yeah, you make a good point. It is kind of here to stay, and who knows what it's going to look like in a year or two. Our audience is going to, I'm sure there are certain things they're going to be very comfortable with keeping the same, such as working from home. It's working out really well for a lot of people, a lot of companies. For me personally, like I said, nothing beats being, in a venue and having that whole experience. But for a lot of people, America, for example, is a very big place, and there are a lot of rural communities, and to get out to a venue and see an artist that you might be interested in, it's kind of a rare opportunity. So
Absolutely.
Certainly it does give certain audiences access to something they would not have so easily. So, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Let's still hope that that is not our only option in, you know, the next 2 years, and that, you know, sooner than later we can all get out there again and sort of enjoy life and kind of celebrate music, you know, the way it should be celebrated, right?
Yes, hoping. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right on. Okay, Chris, I had a fantastic time talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah. So before we go ahead and plug your websites, and any events coming up, and how can people find out more about you and your artists? Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. Just for your time. So you can find us on all the usual platforms, all the social medias. We are Holy Smokes Records. You'll also find us at www.holysmokesrecords.com. So you'll see it there.
All right, perfect. Chris, you take care of yourself. Have a good evening. We will catch up with you soon.
Cheers, man. All the best. Thanks for your time.
All right, thanks.